Ho, 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 scoundrels! I've got you a Christmas present, and it's a Christmas tier list for WildRift. I hope you enjoy it. If you don't enjoy it, there isn't a receipt, so you can't take it back. I'm sorry. If you'd like to be a scoundrel, enjoy the Scoundrel's Den, there is a subscription button down below. On this channel, we do tier lists like this. We do general WildRift gameplay guides. We do specific champion guides. We do item guides. Basically, a lot of WildRift theory to help you understand the game a bit better and hopefully then get better at it yourselves. And next year, once esports kicks off, I will be doing a lot of esports analysis. For those of you that don't know, my main job is to be an esports commentator for League of Legends, the older brother to WildRift, and then a lot of that theory translates over, so I'm kind of excited to get into and break down WildRift esports next year. Of course, thanks to G2A, as always, for sponsoring the channel. There is a reference link in the description below. Now let's jump into the tier list video, and of course, there is a little disclaimer whenever I do a tier list. I base my tier lists on high elo gameplay, and match histories that I have kind of gone through and watched from streams of high elo gameplays that I'm watching, as well as talking to my friends that are currently at the high end of the leaderboard. And then also mix it in with some theory of the balance that I know myself, and we produce these tier lists. They are, for the most part, a mix of opinions. And of course, opinions can be wrong. There are going to be people that can play like B or C tier heroes at the highest elos and still win with them because they are especially good with those particular champions. But yes, of course, whenever we do a champion tier list, there is going to be some debate about what is good and what is not. But this is a general guide. You don't have to stick to it. It's just to help you get a flavor for what is currently being played at the high tiers of WildRift. And without further ado, let's jump into the first lane, which is going to be that Baron lane. So starting in the Baron lane, and this has been an interesting lane to talk about because it is something that actually hasn't been impacted too much by the recent B patch. But what we have started to see in higher elos is Olaf make his way towards that top. So you'll notice that there isn't a huge amount of difference between this and my previous tier list. I'm going to give you a brief explanation of what the tiers mean and how I've ordered it. We're going from S plus to D. S plus is like the champions that you'll see in 90% of your games at the higher elos. These are just the really good champions that in that particular role are very, very strong right now. And then we go down to S, which is very good. A, good. B, okay, like these champions are, you can get wins with them very easily, they're decent. C is like not recommended, like they're not ideal for that particular lane. And D, usually these champions are considered pretty bad, like they're just not played because for one reason or another, they just don't function particularly well. And I have kind of ordered them in each tiers from left to right, with left being the best in that respective tier to the right being the worst in that respective tier. Okay, so Olaf, Darius, and Camille in S plus tier. I think Olaf is probably the best top laner or the best Baron laner right now, simply just because he dominates a lot of matchups with the ability to just throw his axe consistently, and I think very few people can out-trade him on a sort of a melee basis. Going down, I think Gragas. Only reason I don't think Gragas is S plus is because he had a recent nerf, and also he's probably better played in mid lane. But most people will say, well, if I can't play Gragas mid, I'm going to play Gragas in Baron lane, and that's kind of why Gragas ends up, because he's just a very, very still a very, very high tier champion right now. Fiora and Akali, both great champions too. Why is Akali not in S plus after her recent buffs? The problem with Akali is she's very snowball heavy. If you don't snowball the game with Akali, then you unfortunately are going to find yourself being in a pretty rough position. People like Gragas and Darius and even Camille, they retain some utility. Like you can play them and always have an impact in the game, even if you're falling behind in lane. The same with Malphite to an extent, but Malphite just sucks in the laning phase for the most part. In A tier, Malphite, Garen, and Nasus. These are all good champions. They do have exploitable laning phases, though. Garen can be pretty hard to trade against, but, as long as you're careful around his level 5, it's very difficult for Garen to sort of really get a major edge. In B tier, Jax is okay, but his laning phase is pretty poor. You kind of have to cheese someone at level 1 to really take the advantage. Vayne is good against a lot of the champions that you see above her, but also she's very, very vulnerable in lane. Easily dived, very vulnerable to jungle pressure, and Vayne's just not in a great spot as a particular champion right now anyway. And then going down, Mundo and Singed, like they're okay, but they're just not as good as some of the picks in the categories above. I wouldn't recommend Jarvan top lane. I think he's probably better off in the jungle. And Zed, he's much, much better mid lane. The problem with Zed in Baron lane is you'll often go up against like either someone that's very, very willing to build armor very early on, and that'll just stop your snowball potential. Whereas in mid, you're more likely to face mages, and that's why why Zed's better in that respective role. And Tryndamere, he's just not in a good spot right now. Tryndamere's struggling, and I'm not convinced that he's a strong Baron lane pick in any way, shape, or form, realistically. But Olaf, Darius, and Camille, they're kind of like the picks that you'll see a lot of, followed very quickly by the likes of things like Gragas, Fiora, and Akali. You're probably seeing a lot more Akali now since the buffs, but this is just my opinion based on some kind of data that I've gathered, that this is kind of like the Baron lane tier list that I'm working with right now. Okay, now looking into the jungle, and this is an interesting one. A lot of people will be kind of, I guess, curious where Lee Sin sits after the nerfs. Well, even with the nerfs, Lee Sin is still incredibly good. The reason being is that jungle is often dominated by those kind of junglers that have big impact early, and Lee Sin, in my opinion, is still the biggest impact early jungler. Like, his Sonic Wave range is super strong for setting up ganks. He still has the mobility of his Safeguard. And if you're getting to the late game and you're not already stomping with Lee, then, you know, I don't think it matters too much about the Safeguard shield and the heal amount. You know, a lot of what Lee Sin does in the late game is finding really important kicks or isolating people. And you still have that ability to secure neutral objectives with the Sonic Wave and Resonating Strike, execute plus your Smite. So even with the nerfs, Lee Sin, in my opinion, still remains a very, very high tier jungle pick. The only thing I'd say is that Shyvana has kind of moved to meet him in the S+ tier. Her clear speed is really good. She hits level 5 really quickly. And even with the nerfs to her Dragon Breath or Flame Breath or whatever it is in her Dragon form, she's still super strong. Amumu, the nerfs did hurt him a little bit. I've played him a decent amount, and still at Platinum level, he's a great pick, so don't get worried too much about Amumu. Vi and Gragas sit pretty highly. Gragas is still just a great pick in general, so don't worry too much about the Gragas nerfs. Even though they did hit some of his scaling, he still has a lot of damage output, and I'd say that most people will still find Gragas a very, very solid and viable pick in both jungle, mid, and top, to be honest with you. The thing that you might notice is that Xin Zhao has moved down a little bit. Yeah, Xin Zhao just unfortunately, I think pales a little bit now compared to some of the other junglers. I don't think he's as strong as he once was. Those nerfs hit him pretty hard. And actually, the most interesting addition here is the Evelynn into A tier. A lot of people, and myself included, were a little bit, I guess, interested. I guess we were interested in what the Evelynn Q or the Evelynn Hate Spikes range increase would give her. Well, it allows her to charm much more easily and also play ranged in fights a little bit more readily as well. Honestly, I would suggest you go and try out Evelynn. I have got a guide coming out on her tomorrow. She is really strong. Very, very strong solo queue, like really good at single picks as well, and I think the range buff on her hate spikes have made her a very strong jungler. The only reason she's not much higher is because, again, she's one of those junglers that is very snowball heavy. B, her team fight impact is relatively limited. Like, compared to look at the champions above with their team fight impact, it's much higher. Evelyn's team fight impact is a lot lower. Graves, Olaf, they're both good junglers. Down a little bit further, Jack's not a great jungler, same as Master Yi. They scale well, but they're a bit easily exploited in the early game. Jarvan's alright, but I still just don't think he's strong enough to compete with some of the other gank-heavy junglers. Camille, much better off played in Baron lane, but she is still a solid jungler if you need to pick her. Mundo and Malphite don't do anything. Like, especially pre-5 for Malphite, and again, Tryndamere is just a terrible champion. So that is my jungle tier list. Let's move on to our next lane, which is mid. Okay, moving on, like I said, to mid lane. And again, there'll be some changes here that you might be surprised about. For instance, Gragas is now S+. He wasn't S+ before. Why is he S+ now after he got nerfed? Well, I underrated Gragas massively, especially when it comes to the high elo preferences. Gragas is often considered a pretty high tier first pick, and actually even with the nerfs, he's still incredibly strong. And most people prefer to play him mid, I assume, because of his roam potential from the mid lane to be able to impact either side lanes. Orianna is, in my opinion, S+. I think she's got great teamfight control. I think she's got great lane dominance. I think Orianna is a very, very highly skilled, high skill cap mid laner. I just think Orianna, I rate her highly compared to some of the others. Why have I moved Zed down? Zhonya's got buffed, so the Zhonya cost came down, or the stasis enchant, should I say. When I say Zhonya's, I often mean stasis enchant. And that means that Zed's a little easier to counter earlier on into the game. Also, some of the armor penetration that Zed would rely on to get through some of the front line has also come down a little bit. I still think Zed is incredibly good, which is why he's the highest on the S tier. I just think he's out. He has a few more counters, and a few of the things that made him, I think, harder to play have become more easily accessible now in the game. Ahri, Akali, and Yasuo, all great. Again, Akali, a brilliant champion right now, but is very snowball heavy and doesn't quite have the utility of the Orianna and the Gragas in case you're falling behind. Fizz, brilliant laner. I think the #1 player on the Japan server was a Fizz one-trick for some time, and I definitely think Fizz is an underrated champion, and we might see him climb as more people start to pick him up, but right now he's just, I would say, struggles against versus some of the lane matchups that you can see above him. Twisted Fate, good, but doesn't have the same kind of lane pressure than some of the other picks above him do. And actually, his ultimate, because the map is so small, it doesn't mean as much as it does in the League of Legends PC version. But still, Twisted Fate is a good pick, as is Aurelion Sol. But Aurelion Sol is very roam heavy. You need to be using your roaming ability on cooldown whenever you can to impact the side lanes. And Seraphine, probably better played in support, but she is a solid mid laner. Annie and Lux, both very playable. I've seen some incredibly good Annie players. Especially with the Hextech belt being, or the Hextech enchantment on the boots where you can sort of flash forward with the Tibbers. I've seen some great Annie plays with the use of that particular item, but they are a little worse compared to their counterparts above. However, again, you can still easily win games with Annie. In fact, Annie is one of the better picks for low elo because she's just so simple to play. And I think, it's definitely a strong pick if you're considering picking up a mid laner that's going to win you some big team fights. And Ziggs, I just don't think he's in a good spot. Genuinely don't think Ziggs is in a good spot. He feels really clunky on WildRift, and I think until they adjust some of the way he plays, I don't see him being a particularly viable mid laner for the time being. And that's mid. Let's move on to the AD carry role. Okay, let's move on to the AD carry marksman role, and let's think about the tier list for these guys. And you may be surprised. There are no S+ AD carries right now, and that's because I don't think there are any AD carries where I'd be like, this needs to be high up on the pick order. Mainly because the Jhin nerfs did enough to put him in line with some of the other AD carries in the meta, and also they nerfed the shared experience gain. So bot lane in general has been, or dragon lane in general, has been negatively impacted by some of the changes that have happened, and therefore, I'd still think, I actually think AD carries in general had a pretty hard time of it, but I just think that they aren't as strong as they once were, and especially Jhin, with him being knocked down a peg. I believe he is, with Kai'Sa and Draven, the 3 best marksmen in the game right now, but it is pretty closely followed by the likes of Misfortune and even Ezreal with the nerf. Jinx, Ashe, and Vayne are all perfectly viable too, as long as you can survive the laning phase. The Varus buffs, I'm just not sure what to make of them. I have seen some AP Varus. I don't know if it's good. So I'm going to be completely honest with you guys. I don't know where I can put Varus right now. I don't want to over-egg him. I don't want to say he's the best ever, but I'm interested to see how the AP Varus line shakes up and whether we see some more AD Varus in the meta as well, especially with the fact that tank items have got better and Varus has got natural tank shredding built into his kit. I'm just not sure, but I have seen some more Varus players, so I'll be interested to see if he starts to spike up in the meta. If he does, I'll probably do another tier list next week once we've seen some of this meta settle down. Again, these things do change over time as more people kind of get used to the way that these champions work. This is just my current thoughts on the AD carry tier list. And speaking of bot lane and dragon lane, let's go to our final pickup, which will be supports. Okay, let's move on to our supports, and poor old Blitzcrank got a huge nerf on the last patch, the little B patch, and that's kind of knocked him down massively to A tier. I still think Blitzcrank is good. The reason I think Blitzcrank is good is he's still a solid counter if you can land your hooks to enchanters. Obviously, if you miss your hook, it's much more punishing now, and you're going to get battered in lane. But if you can land your hook, he's still a good counter to enchanters. The best supports in the meta, as far as I can see, are Alistar and Janna right now. I underrated Janna on the last patch. She's become a very popular support, and as I said in one of my videos, I believe she's one of the best supports in the game right now. Both her and Alistar offer a lot to the laning phase. They've got dive potential, the shielding is great for trading from Janna, the knock-up and the CC that Alistar provides is almost unmatched in the laning phase, and so I think they're both just two of the best, I guess, game-wide supports right now, because, as you scale into the late game, both of these supports are absolutely fantastic. Seraphine, I think, is probably the best enchanter in the meta. The reason that she's not S+ tier is because she doesn't offer much apart from lane poke. And if you lose out on that, Seraphine becomes easily zonable. She becomes a little bit reliant on her ultimate to do anything. And I think people like Alistair will start to bully you if they get the advantage. You know, if Alistair can land a combo on you, she's a little bit vulnerable to those types of combos. A flash pulverize, for instance, can very easily put Seraphine in a bad spot. And so therefore, she's very volatile in the sense that she can either do really well or she'll just end up doing really badly. I think Braum is good, but he is very easily punished by enchanters. It's quite difficult to go all in with Braum compared to the likes of Alistair. Alistair is just a nice little combo between two of your abilities. To go all in with Braum, you either need your ultimate or you need your AD carry to be on par. And I think, you know, with Jhin, Braum doesn't work the best because Jin's attack speed is so slow that you can't really make use of his passive as easily. I think Sona and Nami are really good. And again, like I talked about Blitzcrank, I actually think Gragas support works well. The problem is that Gragas is just still so good overall, but he's not as good, you know, as Alistair for just all-in potential. But, you know, post 5, Gragas has got some great all-in potential. I think Soraka is decent, but I've seen a lot of people play her recently. I'm just not entirely sold on Soraka right now. Again, she's she's easily punished by a good enchanter, you know, and she's also easily punished by anybody with engage. But I might eat my words on that because I've seen a lot of Soraka being played recently, and I don't like level 5 all-in supports, so the Malphites and the Annies. I don't like them particularly because, again, I don't like relying on level 5 to be the way that I win my lane. I like Malphite a bit more than Annie because he's a bit more durable, but yeah, these guys are like the level 5 all-in supports, and I'm not a big fan of them right now in the current meta. Okay, that's my tier list. I hope you enjoyed it. And again, I know this is going to stoke some discussion in the comments below. People always love to kind of throw their opinions out, and I definitely celebrate that. I want you guys to throw your opinions out. If I'm wrong, tell me that I'm wrong. If you agree with me, tell me that I'm right. I don't mind. This is just my opinion at the end of the day. And things are not always going to be 100% correct, especially only one day after the patch came out. I'm doing this just based on the data that I have, but things may change. And as always, expect me, if things change significantly, to publish another tier list and keep you guys up to date with the way the meta is going. If you enjoyed the content, feel free to subscribe, and I will see you guys soon.